Please welcome Julia Leininger, German Development Institute.
Yeah, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ambassador Gorty, thank you very much for this inspiring speech. I've got the pleasure to present the results of all the discussions we had in the T20 group on Africa-related issues to you. And our starting point is that G20 is about inclusive globalization, and inclusive globalization does not work without Africa. That's why we as a T20 group, we focused on issues relevant for G20 and Africa. And there are two questions actually that emerge from the cooperation between G20 and Africa. The first one is the how question. How can a consistent and stable relationship be ensured in the future? And the second question is a what questions. What are the issues that should be addressed in cooperation between G20 and Africa? We as T20 think tanks, we did not address these questions on our own. We did this together with African colleagues aiming at joint knowledge production. And at our conference, at our T20 Africa conference in Johannesburg that took place in February of this year, two products resulted from this discussion between T20 think tanks and African think tanks. And I think you should see a slide somewhere on this. The first is the T20 Africa Standing Group, and the second one is concrete policy recommendations. With regard to the first one, forget about this slide. We will come to that later, actually. With regard to the T20 Africa Standing Group, we agreed that Africa should be an issue on the agenda of G20 and T20 in the years to come. So yesterday at night, we were delighted to launch the T20 Africa Standing Group. We had a meeting with T20 and African think tanks. We agreed to meet for an annual conference and an annual working meeting throughout the next 2.5 years, and our aim is to create joint knowledge to enrich the G20 process and produce policy recommendations. If you want to know more about this, please leave your business card in this, actually I don't know what it's called, in this thingy outside at the speaker's desk. There's my name, Julia Leininger, and you can leave your business card if you want to know more about the T20 Africa Standing Group. With regard to the policy recommendations, as I said, there is the question of how and the question of what. With regard to the how can cooperation between G20 and Africa be organized in the future? First, on the G20 side, a first step towards a more inclusive G20 process would be that Africa should be heard and considered in all working groups, not only the development working group as it is the practice today. In addition, the G20 should consider a permanent seat for the African Union in the G20 and not only an observer status. Second, on the African side, and this is something that was very strong in the discussions in Joburg, coming from our South African and African colleagues, is that the AU Commission should take a leading role in bringing together African intellectual leadership to set up a secretariat to engage with G20 and together with the African Development Bank and the UN Economic Commission for Africa, create or establish a G20 knowledge center that draws on the expertise of African think tanks. With regard to the what is the content of this relationship? And now we are coming to that slide. The first point here is that any G20 policy should be based on the African Union's Agenda 2063 and the 2030 Agenda. And the good news is that all agendas that are on the table prioritize investment. So in one of the policy briefs, based on Afrobarometer's data, meaning that people are asked what they want, so the needs of the people are included here as well, shows that investments in infrastructure is important. And it's not only important for economic growth, because our question is not only whether there is better infrastructure. Our question is whether better infrastructure leads to better and sustainable development. And here the evidence is that lived poverty in Africa is correlated to a lack of infrastructure, meaning where countries invest in infrastructure, have better infrastructure, lived poverty is lower. This is a correlation we cannot see with regard to GDP growth. So here the message is infrastructure is crucial. And the very last short point, it's not only about physical infrastructure and technical process, it's also about trust in political institutions. So if you want to know more about this, I invite you to read the policy briefs. You can find them on the T20 Insights. And I think many of the topics I touched upon will be raised in the discussion again. Thank you.